From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
President Biden dealt fresh blows in his attempt to unify the party behind his candidacy as another House Democrat calls for him to step out of the 2024 race. And Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi calls it, quote, his decision, stopping short of a full-throated endorsement.
Top Biden campaign aides now set to meet with Democratic senators tomorrow ahead of the president's high-stakes news conference at the NATO Summit.
That summit now in its second day with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky meeting with House Speaker Mike Johnson on Capitol Hill. We'll have more this hour with Senate Foreign Relations Committee member Bill Hagerty and former NATO Ambassador Bailey Hutchison.
Thanks for joining us on the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We begin today with concerns inside the Democratic Party that remain today over President Biden's candidacy. Some Democrats have been vocal about their doubts, while others have reaffirmed their support for the president. As you've followed along with us here on Balance of Power, former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, though, talked about it today, making news, saying it's the president's decision to make whether he stays in this race or not. She talked about it in an interview on MSNBC. Here she is.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. I want him to do whatever he decides to do. And that's the way it is. Whatever he decides, we go with.
Joining us now, Bloomberg's Mario Parker covering politics and the White House, including this Biden campaign. Mario, it's great to have you at the table as we sit here on the eve of this news conference for Joe Biden, which the campaign hoped would put this entire conversation to an end. Then we hear from Nancy Pelosi. She could have said that she's behind Joe Biden, that he should be in this race, the only one who can beat Donald Trump. What's the residue of this remark today?
Well, for someone like Joe Biden, who's had a 50-year career in Washington, D.C., that's rivaled by only someone like Nancy Pelosi, right? This is an astute politician at work here. She knows what she's saying. She knows that words matter. Mm-hmm. That was a very deliberate fastball that she essentially threw at the White House today.
Well, and it wasn't just her. Even if you had to read between the lines for Nancy Pelosi, others came out and said it, like Congressman Pat Ryan, the Democrat from New York. Joe Biden needs to drop out of this race. They have not yet succeeded in stopping the bleeding if you're still getting this drip of those calling for him to step out. Yeah,
and to your point, Kaylee, to play off of the metaphor with a drip, at one point this week, it looked like Biden, if this is a leaky house, he had gotten a leak kind of sealed. It was in a do-it-yourself type of job. And as soon as he got that leak kind of sealed, a leak burst out somewhere else. And that's what we're seeing right now. Now there's this high-stakes meeting tomorrow with the Senate, with some of his key aides that he's dispatching there as well. And as to Joe's point, this is going to occur, not probably, on the day that he holds the most consequential press conference of his 5 decades career here in Washington.
If Nancy Pelosi were not enough, we hear from George Clooney. Isn't this something? In the New York Times, I love Joe Biden, but we need a new nominee is the headline. And, of course, he was just with Joe Biden raising a lot of money at a very high-profile event out west that included Barack Obama. You can see it on the screen if you're with us here on Bloomberg TV. It's devastating to say it, but the Joe Biden I was with 3 weeks ago at the fundraiser was not the Joe Big effing deal Biden of 2010. He wasn't even the Biden of 2020, Mario. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate. How damaging is this to hear from Hollywood?
This is, in some ways, just as damaging as Nancy Pelosi making the statement, if not more, right? Because Hollywood had been the lifeline for Biden's re-election campaign. If recall, his last foreign trip, he left immediately to fly to Hollywood to raise money, right? That was the one advantage or bright spot that he had held over Donald Trump, even though that had been fleeting in recent weeks, but that was the one bright spot that he had. The fact that his number one campaign, fundraiser for his campaign, Jeffrey Katzenberg, for example, is a creature of Hollywood. The fact that Hollywood is essentially, George Clooney is getting out front saying that the spigot may be starting to turn off there.
Well, and I would point out that travel to Hollywood after the international travel is something that President Biden then tried to blame in part for his poor debate performance, all that travel that he had done. Just quickly, Mario, if the news conference doesn't go well tomorrow, are we talking about a Biden that would maybe drop out of the race by the end of the weekend, or are we not going to know until we get to Chicago?
It goes back to that leak, right? That leak that we talked about that was dripping. The press conference goes bad tomorrow. It's a full-on onslaught at that point.
All right. Well, we'll have special coverage of that news conference here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And, of course, Bloomberg's Mario Parker is going to be covering it as well. You can find all of his work on the terminal and online. Now we look across the aisle as Donald Trump yesterday held a rally in Florida where he teased a pick for vice president and said that Florida Senator Marco Rubio might not be there in the Senate to vote for his no tax on tips plan.
What I'm going to do is something that nobody has ever even thought about doing. No tax on tips. Marco, you're going to vote for it, I hope. Well, you may or may not be there to vote for it, but you'll be involved.
Let's bring in now Bloomberg's Julie Fine. So, Julie, we've come to understand that it is Senator Marco Rubio, Senator J.D. Vance, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum that are comprised of the ultra-short list for the VP pick from Donald Trump. He has suggested, though, he might want to wait until we're actually in the middle of the RNC to announce it. How close are we getting to the edge here?
We're getting really close because the RNC is in, less than a week here. Don't be surprised if he does it either way. I think the former president is enjoying the speculation. Yes, he was with Marco Rubio campaigning. However, what's interesting about this whole Veep stakes, as they call it, is that Marco Rubio is actually being looked at as the establishment candidate here, a far cry from, a decade ago when it was looked at much differently. So you've got someone that is in business. You have one that is being referred to as an establishment candidate, and then you have J.D. Vance, who's new to the Senate. So whatever pick it's going to be, we are going to know in a few days. I think the real question here now is whether it's before the convention or during the convention. But meantime, there's also talk of the cabinet as well. Earlier today, I talked to Texas Governor Greg Abbott and asked him if he was interested in that. Here's what he had to say.
The most important political job in the United States is President of the United States. The second most important political job in America as governor of Texas. And I'm running for re-election as governor of the great state of Texas.
Rule it out?
I'm ruling it out.
I think we're going to be hearing a lot about possible cabinet members once you get through the convention, and also you see exactly who the vice president is going to be and where everybody else is going to land. It'll be an interesting next week on both sides of the aisle, as you just said as well. Joe and Kaylee?
You can find Julie's full interview with the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, online and on the terminal. Bloomberg's Julie Fine. We thank you for joining us tonight. Fascinating wrinkle on this story as Republicans line up for another potential Trump administration. Another big story we are following today, breaking in just the last hour. Archegos Capital Management founder Bill Hwang found guilty of criminal charges stemming from his firm's 2021 collapse. And Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn at the courthouse in Lower Manhattan now with this breaking story. Vonnie, what do you have?
Literally, the jurors just coming out, Joe, as we speak. The verdicts came in just a few minutes ago. The jury having started deliberations yesterday at 1 p.m. This has riveted Wall Street for the last 2 months. It was 7 weeks of testimony plus a week of recess. And then this week, the deliberations. And it's basically a clean sweep for the U.S., for U.S. Attorney Damian Williams. A massive success following on the heels of the Sam Bankman-Fried conviction. So essentially what the prosecution was saying was that Bill Hwang in Archegos was running an enterprise, right? Like any other kind of criminal enterprise. He broke the RICO statute. He manipulated stocks higher. He continued to try to amass capacity and leverage himself to the extent that it was always going to be a wash. And that happened the week of March 22nd when Archegos, at $36 billion on paper at the time, was completely wiped out, leaving counterparties across Wall Street, many of the major banks, including Credit Suisse and Nomura, the biggest among them, with massive losses totaling $10 billion collectively. So the charges were breaking the RICO statute, so racketeering, conspiracy, securities fraud, wire fraud, and additionally for Hwang, another 7 charges of securities manipulation, market manipulation. Now, on one count, he was found not guilty. That pertains to one particular stock. But on all of the others, he was found guilty. And his former CFO, Patrick Halligan, also found guilty on all three charges. The men are going to be sentenced October 28th at 2:30. There is likely to be an appeal as well, obviously. And I should mention that the defence had some arguments. For example, this couldn't have been a pump and dump scheme because there was no dump. Bill Hwang was thoroughly convinced of the value of these stocks, and he just wanted to keep adding to his portfolio, and he never sold. He never lost his conviction. And also, it did turn on two cooperating witnesses, both of whom had pleaded guilty and are hoping now to avoid jail time, obviously.
All right, Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn live outside the courthouse for us tonight. Thank you so much. Now, still ahead, we'll go live to Capitol Hill, where Chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell, wrapped up 2 days of testimony before Congress. We'll be joined by a member of the Senate Banking Committee who questioned him yesterday. Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee is next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're coming off of a 40-year high in inflation. We've seen the rate of inflation coming down, but we haven't gotten to the 2% target. And my concern, for lack of a better term, is whether or not this might be transitory in terms of the data that we're seeing right now.
That's exactly why we're approaching this question carefully.
With caution, Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee talking with Jay Powell about the trajectory of inflation during the Fed chair's first day of congressional testimony this week. Powell echoing that sentiment today on the House side, telling the Financial Services Committee, quote, "The job is not done on inflation," unquote. Markets seem to like it nonetheless. Glad to have Senator Bill Hagerty with us right now. Live from Capitol Hill. Senator, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. You've been calling, I believe, for rate cuts over the course of this regime. Are you now saying that it's the right move, higher for longer, when it comes to interest rates?
Joe, I actually haven't been calling for rate cuts at all. What I've been calling for is for the Fed to remain data-driven. I know Chairman Powell is under a tremendous amount of political pressure to cut rates. My colleagues, frankly, my colleagues from the other side of the aisle on the Democrat side have put immense pressure on him to cut rates ahead of the November election. What I've been maintaining is that he needs to remain data-driven, because to the extent the Fed gets involved or even gives the appearance of acting in a political fashion, it will destroy its credibility. Chairman Powell made it clear in his testimony with me that he understands that. He's going to remain data-driven. We see inflation moving, directionally downward, at least the rate of growth, but it's not where it's supposed to be. And I think he's going to make certain that this isn't a transitory bump before he takes any sort of action. I think that's the right thing for the Fed to do. We need to make certain that we get inflation under control. And the most important thing right now is that they not allow themselves to be perceived as political actors.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Senator, if it really is about the data, and say the data tomorrow and the data that we get in the intervening months do show that inflation is indeed cooling, that data could support the idea that the Fed would cut rates, are you essentially saying there is no way that they can do that before the election without it being seen as political, even if the indicators within the economy would support it?
No, Kayleigh, I think, you mentioned the indicators. They just have to support it. And I don't care when it happens, as long as the data do support it. I'm just concerned that he's getting a lot of pressure. The Fed chair is getting a lot of pressure right now that is political in nature. And I think he's got to stick to his guns. He gave me every indication in his testimony that that is precisely what he's going to do.
It brings us to the issue of Fed independence, Senator, something that you brought up in your remarks yesterday. Here's what you had to say during yesterday's testimony, and we'll follow up with a question.
As you know, the Federal Reserve was structured to shield monetary policy from political influence, and that independence has given the Fed unique credibility in executing its mission. If the FOMC were influenced in any way by political calculation rather than economic data, it would severely damage the Fed's credibility as an independent institution. It would increase uncertainty in our markets, and it would jeopardize the dollar's status as the global reserve currency.
So Fed independence is something we hear about every time we talk to White House officials, Senator, and I'm glad that you went there. You're talking about this through the guise of Joe Biden's political interests here, but I wonder where you are on Fed independence if there's another Trump administration, because we all remember the tweeting directly at the Fed chair, and now reading reports that the former president wants to be more directly involved if he wins this election and actually have a hand in setting interest rates. Does Fed independence work for both sides of the aisle?
Well, it definitely should. And I think the case is very clear that as long as the Fed maintains a data-driven approach, that we will see certainty in the marketplace. The world looks to what the Fed does. And the approach that Chairman Powell has taken, and I think that I'll maintain this over time, we need to make certain that the Fed is perceived not as a political actor, but one that is driven by the data.
Of course, it's not just the Fed's job to set monetary policy. They also act as a regulator of the banking system. And Chairman Powell did make a little news in your hearing yesterday in regard to Basel III and what the end game will be. He suggested they're going to have to repropose it. What do you need to see in that reproposal?
Well, frankly, I don't think we even require a submission. We've been through a massive stress test if you think about what happened through the pandemic. And for 3 consecutive years, we were told that the system was adequately capitalized. We get a new vice chair who comes in and makes a dramatic proposal that everyone in the industry told me would have been devastating in terms of our competitiveness as a nation. Our banking system is one of our true sources of competitive advantage here in America. And this would have placed us at a huge disadvantage relative to Europe and relative to other banking systems across the world. I'm delighted to see that the Fed board has realized that. They've withdrawn it, or he's talking about withdrawing it and reproposing. At least he's indicated, the chair has indicated that they're going to follow the Administrative Procedures Act, and that means they will have a reasonable amount of input from the industry, and I hope that they'll take that fully into account.
Donald Trump has said, Senator, that he wants to be the most crypto-friendly president in American history. I guess that history doesn't go back too far if we want to draw a comparison, but what would that look like?
Well, I've spent a good deal of time with the president talking about this industry. And what we see, and I think a shared vision came through in our Republican platform just this week. We see crypto as a defining issue in the election this November. And I think as voters go to the polls, they're going to realize that as they cast their vote will determine the outcome of the crypto industry here in America. Because on the Democrat side, you have a group that are, I think, very radically trying to centralize everything. They want central control. They don't like the decentralized nature of cryptocurrency. They don't like the decentralized nature of crypto technology. The innovation is going to happen. Crypto technology possesses tremendous potential for America. We have innovative DNA here that goes beyond any other nation. We should capitalize on that. We'll create the ecosystem that would allow for that. And our platform basically says we're going to end the crackdown on the crypto industry. We're going to allow mining. We're going to create an ecosystem for innovation. We're going to allow decentralized control of these assets. And we're not going to allow the type of surveillance that the Democrat solution would support.
Well, it's interesting, Senator, to hear a little bit about the conversations you've had with the former president on that subject. And knowing that you served as his ambassador to Japan, I wonder what conversations you've had with him about the U.S.'s relationship with allies as we have the NATO Summit underway here in Washington. Do you expect that the nature of U.S. participation in that alliance will be changed in any way if he does indeed win in November? Are allies right to be concerned about that as they meet this week?
Kayleigh, I've met with a number of our allies during the course of this week because they realize I'm the only former member of the Trump administration that serves in the United States Senate. And I've been very clear with them. America first does not mean America alone, but what we want to see is our allies standing strong with us. And what we've seen in NATO is that they've responded to President Trump's pressure. They've stepped up their investment. They need to do more. I think President Trump is going to be very clear about that. We don't hesitate to criticize our allies when it's time for them to step up. We stand shoulder to shoulder with them at the same time when the need arises. That's what I've conveyed. That's what I think we'll see as the NATO group continues to visit me here this week. That's a message I'm going to be very consistent in delivering.
All right, Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Banking Committee as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, we'll continue the conversation ahead about Fed Chair Powell's testimony on Capitol Hill this week, specifically what he told lawmakers about housing. We'll have more next from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall on Bloomberg TV and radio. The This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell concluded 2 days of congressional testimony today, with lawmakers grilling him on housing costs and availability as it becomes a top issue on the campaign trail. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has been crunching the numbers on where things stand, and she's here with more. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Kaylee. Fed Chair Jerome Powell told lawmakers today it's no question higher interest rates are making it harder for Americans to buy homes. He said tighter monetary policy is impacting the U.S. housing market and that the best way to combat it is to bring inflation back down to the Fed's 2% goal.
The most important thing we can do for the housing market in the medium and longer term is to get inflation under control so that interest rates can come down, so that we can get back to a more normal interest rate.
Mortgage applications dropped significantly when the Fed started raising rates in 2022. They sunk to nearly 30-year lows and have since flattened out. New mortgage application data out today continued that trend, but Powell did point out one thing the Fed can't control, which is what's become a shortage of affordable housing units in parts of the market that need them the most. Housing costs and availability are becoming top issues in 2024. Here was the White House's response when Jared Bernstein last joined you both here on Balance of Power.
This president has a plan to add 2 million units of affordable housing. We also provided pretty extensive rent assistance to folks already. We're actively trying to help expand the supply of affordable housing, but boy, do we need Congress to work with us on that one.
As for Republicans, housing affordability is what's called a plank in the party's 2024 platform, with a focus on cutting regulations related to owning and building homes. Ben Carson, the former housing secretary under former President Trump, put it this way on debate night.
We worked very hard to decrease some of the regulatory burden to make homes more available, to decrease the cost, and to look at some alternative factors for determining who was eligible, for instance, for FHA loans.
We're waiting on tomorrow's CPI report for June. Housing costs have been a sticking point for inflation. Joe and Kaylee, last month's shelter reading was up 5.4% year over year.
That's tough, Tyler, as we consider data bleeding into politics. To your point here, shelter costs are something that could haunt Joe Biden and Democrats throughout this cycle.
Right. Well, I had the chance to catch up with Senator Sherrod Brown, a Democrat from Ohio, and, of course, the chair of the Senate Banking Committee, which questioned Jerome Powell yesterday. He told me after that hearing that housing costs are one of the top concerns he's hearing from constituents on the campaign trail. And that's part of why he made it such a focus of his questioning during the testimony. Now, of course, as you were talking about with Senator Bill Hagerty, a Republican, just a short while ago, Republicans are really urging Chair Powell to remain data-driven and not to have any political influences. Of course, the Fed maintains that they are independent.
Tyler, thank you for your reporting. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall with us on Balance of Power. Coming up, Ukrainian President Zelensky meets with Speaker Mike Johnson at the NATO Summit here in Washington today. We'll have more next with Bailey Hutchison, former U.S. ambassador to NATO, as we turn our attention back to the summit in geopolitics, only here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
In my estimation, at least, success is a strong, independent Ukraine, increasingly integrated with Euro-Atlantic institutions like the European Union, like NATO, and that is able to stand on its own feet, militarily, economically, democratically. And what we see is Ukraine on a trajectory to do just that.
That was U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking earlier on the future of Ukraine as its war with Russia continues and provides the backdrop to this week's NATO summit in Washington. Joining us now for more is Bailey Hutchison. She is former U.S. ambassador to NATO and former U.S. senator from Texas who is in town for the summit this week and is joining us live in our Washington, D.C. studio. Welcome to Balance of Power, Ambassador. It's great to have you here in person. Obviously, you're here with many others, including Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for the summit this week. Ukraine, clearly, as the secretary was alluding to, wants a path to be able to join NATO. You've served at this institution. How difficult is that going to be? Is that the one thing Ukraine cannot walk away with this week?
Well, I think they're going to get all of the parameters that are going to be required, and they're going to get all the help to fulfill those parameters. And I think what they will get is an assurance that when they meet those tests that every new ally has to meet, that they will be included. And I just know in my heart they're going to be a member of NATO when this horrendous war that they had nothing to do with started. Now I think they have shown such courage and such spirit that they deserve to be with us in a relationship that is a secure relationship.
Well, we're really glad that you're here, because in the time that you were ambassador, you probably couldn't have imagined the moment we're in right now for the 75th anniversary of NATO, with great uncertainty following elections in Europe, uncertainty here domestically, with big questions about the commander-in-chief and his ability to actually do the job, never mind run for it again. How difficult will it be for this summit to produce results with all of that said?
The summit will produce results. There's no doubt that it's not the happiest time, but we're in a war, and so it wouldn't be a happy time anyway.
Sure.
But there is a lot of political turmoil in Europe, in America. There's no doubt about that. What just gives me hope is that we have surpassed so many challenges in our 75-year history. We were just finished with World War II. How could anything be even more horrible than World War II? But putting NATO together was to prevent another world war. And that's what we have been working to do by adapting, which we have. Now we have expanded. I think Europe is now much more clear-eyed about Russia, and that was needed. And now they're getting there. And we're going to be with them, and we're going to form a coalition of like-minded, both Europe and Canada and the U.S., but also into the Asia-Pacific. We have a common threat now with Asia-Pacific countries. So I think our security alliance, led by NATO, is going to be a deterrence for future world conflict.
But there very much is a question about the future. As we talk about political uncertainty, none of us really know what's going to happen in November or therefore in January of next year. That's actually something that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky talked about at the Ronald Reagan Institute last night. He talked about how even Vladimir Putin is awaiting the results of November, but pleaded with NATO allies, instead of waiting until then, to act now.
It's time to step out of the shadows, to make strong decisions work, to act and not to wait for November or any other month to this end.
Obviously talking about the month of November for a very specific reason.
Right, yes,
Ambassador, there has been a lot of conversation here in Washington about Trump-proofing NATO should he win a second term. Can you look allies in the eye and suggest that they don't have any right to be concerned about what might happen if he is president once again, given the rhetoric we have heard directly from him?
Well, I think the allies are going to be meeting with members of Congress, for instance, and no president can leave NATO or withdraw from NATO without a vote of Congress. And Congress is very supportive of NATO, of the alliance, and of Ukraine. I think that President Zelensky, of course, is just an amazingly resilient leader in toughest of circumstances. And of course he wants action now, and we're giving him the arms, and I think finally we are also giving him more freedom to use these arms to take out the bases that are putting those missiles into children's hospitals, which just happened in the last 2 days. And I think we are going to give him these more assets, but also more freedom to use them to take out the places that are bombing and maiming his own people and just ruining the infrastructure.
This idea, though, of possibly redefining Article 5, basing protection on levels of contribution, what do you make of this? Our listeners and viewers are trying to figure out what's real right now. Is that just bluster from Donald Trump?
I think that Article 5 is our ironclad commitment that if one of us is attacked, everyone will help. Of course, it's only been invoked once, and it was for America. And I don't think the size of the contribution has anything to do with it. What we want to do is speak not with one voice of America. We want 32 voices and our 40 partners saying the same thing about the rules-based order in the whole globe. And that's what NATO is bringing together, a security alliance that has 32 members, 40 partners that want our way of life, that want freedom. And if we stand together, we're not going to say, well, you're a small country and we're a big country and therefore we're not going to help you as much. Yeah. No, that's not our commitment. That's not unity.
So whether he wants to or not, your point is that's not the agreement we've made in this alliance.
That is right. That's right. And President Zelensky was awesome last night. I was there. And he is being so patient, grateful, very appreciative. But the leaders of Congress were there too, and they are all pro-Ukraine. They understand. It's Republicans and Democrats, quite bipartisan. And I think that he knows in his heart, of course, that he wants more, but he knows that everything that we're giving him is more than any other new country that seeks membership as an ally has gotten. And that is all of that help to get him to the place where he can really say, yes, we will be a part of NATO.
Well, so that would likely need to happen after the conflict comes to an end. Yesterday, sitting in that chair that you're in now, we spoke with the foreign minister of Latvia, who basically told us Ukraine needs to decide how it wants to define victory. What victory do you think is really likely for Ukraine, assuming that it can maintain the level of support it currently has?
That's a really good question, Kayleigh, because it's hard to know with all of the Crimea and the Donbass that Russia has taken. Of course, Ukraine wants everything back, and they are fighting for that. They can't. They're not going to go to a negotiating table with the lines that Russia has drawn. We've got to start with the lines that are the sovereign nation of the Ukraine. And they deserve their whole country back. And they have fought for it. And we should be helping them to say to Putin, we are united. We're not going to lose interest in what you have done. And he should pay a price for bombing a children's hospital. And then with the ridiculous statement of saying, oh, that was a mistake that the Ukrainian people made. Are you kidding me? So it just doesn't pass the test of really being sincere about what the goal is.
Well, we're glad you could join us in the midst of this summit. Thank you for crossing barriers and closed streets to get to us here at Bloomberg. Former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Bailey Hutchison, we thank you. Coming up, a Hollywood heavyweight calls for President Biden to exit the 2024 race. We'll be joined by our political panel next with our eyes on the campaign trail on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kayleigh Lyons in Washington. Thanks for joining us. President Biden's age once again in the spotlight, with A-list actor George Clooney speculating about his mental agility today, writing in the New York Times, quote, the Joe Biden I was with 3 weeks ago at the fundraiser was not the Joe Big Effing Deal Biden of 2010. He wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate, unquote. Of course, a major fundraiser and a point of influence for the Biden campaign. Joining us now, our political panel. Lauren Tomlinson is back, president of Claffey Communications, and Adam Hodge, Democratic strategist, managing director at Pulpit International. Great to have you both at the table. Great to see you both.
Good to be here.
Boy, this is tough. I'm sure Rob Reiner's saying, hey, what am I? That was 3 days ago. I think he said the same thing. But you can have Nancy Pelosi. You can have lawmakers. It's different when somebody like this, who we remember shared a stage with Joe Biden just a couple of weeks ago, drops a bombshell. What does it mean for the campaign?
I think that where the president is today is where he was on Monday when he woke up and started defending himself on Morning Joe. He's going to be the only one that decides whether he's going to be the Democratic nominee. He's not going to get pushed around or pushed out by anybody. He's been pretty defiant. And he's used the NATO Summit, and he'll use the press conference tomorrow night to restate his case about why he thinks he's the best person to be the nominee.
This is someone who's been close to him. We see him from a distance. It says it's not the same man even from a couple of years ago. Is he wrong?
Well, I mean, look, the president has been clear. I've gotten older. I don't speak as smoothly as I used to. In that fiery speech he gave the morning after the debate, he owned up to the fact that he's gotten older. But he's coming back to the fact that I got the judgment, I got the same temerity, everything I need to do this job because I've done it for the last 3 years. He's got to make the case to voters, starting with the press conference tomorrow night, that he is the man for the job. And that's up to him. Only he's the one who can prove, because at the end of the day, he's got the delegates. And if he wants to be the nominee, he'll be the nominee.
Well, yeah, we know that to be true. And while he may be willing to admit that, yes, he has gotten older, perhaps slower, he doesn't seem to be willing to admit he believes the polls that suggest he is losing by perhaps a larger margin to Donald Trump now. This is something we spoke with former Senator Bob Kerrey from Nebraska about last night. And this is what he had to say on the matter.
When you got over 70% of the American people, black, white, Democrat, and Republican, saying he's too old, you can't fix that with, a fiery speech at some event. Well, I'm smelling delusion, not a rational assessment of a guy willing to fight on, and I worry about that.
He's smelling delusion. Lauren, what do you think?
I mean, it's funny to watch the senators come out one by one, especially in these swing states, and start stating more plainly that they don't think that they could win. He's obviously a drag on the ticket. You saw Wisconsin polling say as much. And then Senator Bennett also this morning pretty frank about how he thinks that he should drop out. So, Biden may be committed to do this, but we keep hearing again and again, he's going to prove himself. The ABC interview was supposed to prove himself, and it just reinforced that narrative. Then George Stephanopoulos today caught on TMZ saying that he doesn't think that, he could last another 4 years. George Clooney in the New York Times. So he can say that it's the elites. He can ignore the polling, all the, pundits polling, politicians, as they say, saying that he should call out the voters gave me this mandate. It's just not true, though, at this point. The voters have received new information. He needs to acknowledge that, people are seriously doubting the work that he's doing. And, if he really wants to prove that he can do this, sure, the press conference, I hope it's a robust press conference. Let him stay out there uncontrolled for an hour, right? He has been so micromanaged by this White House, by his staff, all 4 years, and he campaigned during COVID. So people truly haven't seen what he is capable of. And, at least from my perspective, I feel that he was so micromanaged to the point where I have been lied to. And if I feel that way, then how do voters in Wisconsin feel? How do voters in all of these swing states feel? And that's, I think, what's really dragging down the polling is it's not necessarily that they don't like Joe Biden. It's that I've been lied to, and he has been so micromanaged that now I'm seeing the real thing for the first time, and I already voted for him in the primary.
You mentioned Michael Bennet, the senator from Colorado, Democrat, of course, ally of Joe Biden, talked about Joe Biden's odds last night on CNN. Here's what he said.
Donald Trump is on track, I think, to win this election and maybe win it by a landslide and take with him the Senate and the House. The White House, in the time since that disastrous debate, I think has done nothing to really demonstrate that they have a plan to win this election.
Adam, it's like another world from the description that you're giving us here. The attempt to circle the wagons for Democrats hasn't completely worked here, which brings us again back to tomorrow night. If Joe Biden does knock this out of the park, do we reset the clock in another week? How do we look at this?
Well, we will have the RNC convention, which will reset the clock in another way.
Okay.
Look, I think what the campaign and what the president has to do is get out of this part where they're trying to bail water out of the boat and really try to come out with a vision and talk about their message and talk about Project 2025 and the plans for the Trump administration to totally revamp American way of life and the economy. Talk about,
tariffs and what that would mean for people in the economy. They have to get on the front foot and get out of this position of where they're just constantly
Well, his
defending
campaign's going to talk to senators tomorrow. Shouldn't Joe Biden personally go sit down with Michael Bennet?
Well, I mean, I'm sure that is something that they're considering and trying to figure out how, he's been calling members of Congress for the last few days. It's notable that not a single member of the CBC has come out and voiced their opposition to him. The CHC, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, yesterday said they're still with Joe Biden. Stacey Abrams today, op-ed in Atlanta, saying how she's for Joe Biden, thinks he can win in Georgia. So those are the folks that put him in the White House. Those are the folks that helped get him the nomination. He's gone back to the bench, and that's what he's going to rely on to get out of this period. But I think he's got to figure out a strategy to make that contrast and pivot from this position.
All right, Adam and Lauren are going to be sticking with us because speaking of contrast, we got to talk about Donald Trump because is it Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, Doug Burgum, someone else? He's still keeping us guessing on that Veep pick. We'll have that discussion next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Look at all of them back there. Oh, that's a lot, Marco. That's a lot, Marco. I think they probably think I'm going to be announcing that Marco's going to be vice president. I don't know. Because that's a lot of press. That's a lot of press.
Of course, Donald Trump there did not announce that Florida Senator Marco Rubio is his running mate last night in Florida, but he hasn't said anyone else for that matter. Back with us now, our political panel, Lauren Tomlinson, president of Claffey Communications, and Adam Hodge, Democratic strategist and managing director at Pulpit International. So clearly, the former president, Lauren, is having some fun with this. He has suggested that he wants to improve the ratings during the RNC by announcing it while it's actually underway in Milwaukee. He's going to keep us waiting until the last possible second, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're going to definitely wait. And I think because they're purposely letting this space for the media to be consumed by the Joe Biden discussion, which is a smart messaging strategy, he's purposely holding back. So I think this is actually kind of hard for him to because he keeps teasing it. You remember 2016 when we were playing this dance, he was dropping all sorts of bombs all the time. He was in the news all the time. And he was really making people dance for it. I think it's driving him crazy that he can't do that this time around.
So he's not having fun.
Yeah, I don't think he's having fun because I think his advisors are like, please just let the focus be on Joe Biden for right now. So I think he's excited to do it at the RNC convention and make that announcement. So I think we can definitely expect it then. But I'm not sure who it'll be. I think, only Donald Trump knows that. And I think that he'll keep everyone dancing until the last minute.
All right. So I say, let's do this right. If it's not Monday, maybe it's Wednesday, the night the vice presidential candidate would speak, full apprentice boardroom set on the stage at the convention in Milwaukee. They would eat it up. The question is, does the Biden campaign care? Does it matter this time who the running mate is?
No, it doesn't. But I think
there's only one Trump.
But I think your apprentice theme is spot on.
Why not embrace it?
I think he loves dangling people out there. The second thing, I think he also probably loves sticking it to Rubio one more time. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he's bringing him down to Florida.
So this is like Mitt Romney all over again.
He loves every single piece of that. No question about it. I think the key question that I would have is, after what you saw with Mike Pence, why would you want the job? The last one that vice president he had gallows hung out outside the building he was at on January 6th.
Dangerous
so
position.
There's a real question about whether you'd want to go in and do the job. But fair play to anybody who takes that, who catches that falling knife.
Well, I think you have a president who can't run again and who is also not that much younger than Biden, and so probably won't even last all 4 years. So, it actually makes more sense this time around to be the vice president.
You just said he can't last all 4 years. Stephanopoulos said Biden can't last all 4 years. So
There's only 3 years between these guys. I mean, we're talking about two
Trump
very old candidates. So I think when you're talking about it just realistically, the VPs, we should be having VP debates. We should really be vetting the VP candidates here because huge possibility Joe Biden stays on the ticket, Trump's on the ticket. Are we voting for them or are we voting for the VPs?
Well,
Well, that's a very fair point. I believe the two sides haven't actually agreed to do the same vice presidential debate or when. I think they agreed to different ones on different networks.
Dates.
We have 30 seconds left. Who strategically would be the best Veep pick, Lauren, do you think?
Burgum.
Tim Scott.
Tim Scott. I feel like we're not even talking about him being on the short list anymore, Joe.
I'm worried that what he takes away from African-American voters.
Interesting. From Joe Biden, yeah. That's because there is no list. Our thanks to Lauren Tomlinson, Adam Hodge. Great panel, great conversation, and a reminder, of course, that we'll have special coverage from Milwaukee starting Monday here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. To that end, check out the Washington Edition newsletter. You can find a lot more as we gear up for the convention and the vice presidential announcement on the terminal and online.
Yep, we'll see you in Milwaukee next week for sure, but we'll also see you back here in Washington tomorrow night for live special coverage of President Biden's news conference. So join us then on Bloomberg TV and radio.